Our next guest is Daiyaan Petersen, who is a final year BA student, and he is majoring in Arabic and environmental science. He is also a researcher of the free and enslaved Muslim communities at the Cape of Good Hope. So, alhamdulillah, shukran for the work that you do. We also know that you run the archival courses, and so anybody that needs to study or know about or know how to use the archives are welcome to contact Daiyaan. He do run courses from time to time. So, if I can call you up to Daiyaan. Shukran.
Good afternoon and assalamu alaikum, everybody. Today I'm going to speak about some interesting findings from the archives, and then particularly about the first Imam of Wynberg, Imam Badrodien. I just want to explain a bit of background as to what motivated me to research this charismatic individual. So my research focuses mostly around the Muslim community at the Cape in general. But there's been a few aspects that I've been concentrating on in the last year or so. And those are the spaces that the Muslims or the Malays occupied at the Cape. And by spaces, I'm talking about, the cemeteries, the kramats, masjids, langers, which I will explain as well, and so on. So I think about maybe under a year ago, Buddha Ahmad Abrams posted on Facebook that he would firstly he posted that there was a langer in Wynberg and that the first Imam was someone by the name of Badrun or Badrodien, and that there was not much information available about him. So then I proceeded to go and visit Buddha Ahmad Abrams and hear some of the oral history around this individual, and is there any kitabs he might have written, is there anything that he left for us to assist us in trying to find out who he was. And unfortunately, the only thing that was left is this bit of oral history that he was the Imam at the Langer in Sandy Lane. So, from that discussion and visiting Buddha Ahmad, I then decided, let me go to the archives and let me just do some digging and see, is there anything, even if it's, just one line or one document around this individual. And to my amazement, there were probably around maybe 10 or more documents, about him. And I'm sure there are even more that I haven't uncovered yet, because, each document I find, there are hints to even more documents. So, around Imam Badrodien, from what I could tell from documents, I had to make inference, he was born in around 1786. That's a very long time ago. I think it's about I didn't think about the maths, probably just over 240 years? Yeah, 240 years ago. Nobody here today was alive then, so obviously nobody knew him. But just to picture the Cape at the time, slaves were being imported to the Cape. People were born into slavery. Islam was banned. Places of worship for people that were not, specifically of the Dutch Reformed Church or other similar churches, it was... the Cape was an extremely restricted and very much segregated place. And this is the place that Imam Badrodien was born into. So, for about 60 years of his life, there's absolutely no documentation, nothing about him. On the 23rd of December, 1844, cropped up this document in the archives under the Colonial Office, right? The Colonial Office is, under the British administration, it's, the colonies in Kenya, anything that went on there, Lawrence of Arabia, anything that went through, the Colonial Office is deemed under the Colonial Office administration. So we find something called a memorial, which is a letter then written to the Colonial Office or to the registration at the time. And we can see that this individual, Badrodien, which we don't know much about yet in terms of archival timeline, he requests to repair the streets of Simonstown. So now one would think, that's Simonstown, this is Wynberg. How did he get here, right? On the 11th of July, 1846, an individual by the name of Philip, a gardener, dies in Simonstown as well, and is listed as living at the residence of Badrodien. And then I read further, and he had a daughter Rosina, a daughter Hessie, and a daughter Alisa, married to Badrodien. So now we know that Badrodien was married to the daughter of Philip, a gardener in Simonstown. 1844 is around maybe 10 years after the emancipation of the slaves. So Philip was likely a gardener, a slave gardener in his lifetime. On the 1st of June 1848, right, this is where we find the grant given for the Brodie Road Cemetery. And if you go to the deeds office and you look at the records, it's stated that it is given to the Malay Priest Badrodien on behalf of the Wynberg community. And this is where we see this individual, Badrodien, appearing in Wynberg. And we can then sort of picture that, you know, if he wanted to repair the streets of Simonstown, obviously he would have wanted to use the streets for some purpose. And, you know, perhaps he had a horse and cart, perhaps something similar like that. And that is what brought him between the two areas. And then in 1849, I was reading through the thesis of Miss Helen Robinson. And then in there she brings up the almanac of that year. And in that almanac, Badrodien is living in Alphenhill in the Wynberg area, and he's listed as a carrier. Now, a carrier in those days was someone that had a horse and cart, and, you know, he transported goods between areas. So now it makes sense that, okay, he was transporting goods between Simonstown and Wynberg, and, you know, he was obviously educated that he landed up here, and he was a Malay priest, and he was then granted the Brodie Road Cemetery. And then there were a few other, you know, documentation around his occupation and requesting, you know, for more. I think he made another petition to supply the jail at Wynberg. Wynberg had its own jail at the time, and I think he was granted that. And then, unfortunately, on the 24th of June, 1855, a court case pops up, right? And in this court case, it mentions that Badrodien is jailed for receiving stolen goods. And it goes on to state that a house was broken into in Claremont. A house belonged to someone named Dolly, and the thief was a thief by the name of Moos, a maspiker, colluded with this said Badrodien, and Badrodien was then, you know, arrested for this reason. Fortunately, he was bailed, which indicates that, you know, it's likely that, you know, he was falsely accused of this crime. You know, maybe like 2 weeks later, on the 2nd of July, 1855, he is then, you know, taken to court again for receiving stolen goods. So for the same reason, and unfortunately, he is, you know, jailed at this point. And although he maintains his innocence, even his wife is brought in, the wife Alisa, daughter of Philip, the gardener, to give statements, and other individuals are brought in to give statements as well. But it seems that, you know, to no luck, he is just jailed. And then around the same year, in December, his nephew, Africa September, then requests to free his uncle, who is, you know, quite sick at the time. Unfortunately, the government was not convinced by this letter to free the uncle, and he remained in jail. And then on the 5th of April, 1856, so a year later roughly, Badrodien himself requests to be freed from jail. And I just want to read this letter that he wrote. Bear in mind, you know, at the Cape at the time, most people, in fact, were speaking, you know, Kaapse Hollands or Cape Dutch at the time. They weren't English speaking, so whatever I read here is an interpretation by someone from his own language into English, and also it would have, you were likely not literate in the Roman script, he was literate in the Jawi or Arabic script. But it goes as follows: the memorial of Badrodien undergoing punishment by confinement in the Cape Town jail humbly show that your memorialist was in November last condemned to 1 year imprisonment for receiving stolen goods. That memorialist was then and has been since continually suffering from illness which has caused him much bodily harm, much bodily pain, and has thus greatly increased his punishment. That memorialist is nearly 70 years of age and has already done severe penance, having undergone much during the time he was in prison. Old in days, sick in body, and removed from his wife and family, who might relieve his sufferings, that he has always supported himself and family by keeping a school in which he educated Malay children in Arabic. And that since the memorialist's incarceration, his wife, also old, has been obliged to subsist on charity, after selling the few articles of furniture she possessed. Memorialist therefore humbly solicits that it may graciously please Your Excellency to consider the state to which he is reduced, and that he has been more than sufficiently punished for the fault to which he committed, and that Your Excellency will direct that memorialist be discharged from jail, and memorialist as in duty will ever pray. And he signs his name as Khalifa Badrodien. And this is the first instance where he actually signs his name as Khalifa. Anyone that's acquainted with the Muslim community will know that the old slumser school used to have a Khalifa that used to teach them. In today's, I grew up knowing it as a mu'allima, but in those days, much of the older people know it as a Khalifa. So not only was he the first Imam of Wynberg, but he was also the first recorded Khalifa of the area. And after that very heartwarming petition to be released from jail, he was indeed released. But if we can just picture, he was 70 years old at the time. What was he doing committing crimes? He was keeping a Muslim school. He had an old wife. His children were big already. He had no reason to do these things. And there's evidence to show that, around the same time period, there were other Malay priests or imams at the time also being convicted of similar things, such as Imam Abdul Ghani and Imam Abdul Basir of Cape Town, of the Bukap area. Abdul Basir was Imam of the Kapini Street Mosque at the time, and he was convicted of the same thing. In fact, he was also convicted of writing a Jumat, a Tawiz, for these people that were committing these crimes. And there's no hard evidence of this, but unfortunately, unlike Badrodien, he actually succumbed from his old age in jail, and he passed away in jail. So fortunately, Imam Badrodien, he was released from jail after serving the year anyway. And from then on, after this petition, there's no record of Badrodien anymore. I'm sure the jail sentence that he served, it probably killed his spirit. And he was already, quite an old age, and it's likely that he passed away shortly after that. Now, in 1860, there was already the archival documentation called death notices, which was a sort of a registration of your estate. So if you owned anything, they would have to submit a death notice for yourself should you die. The fact that he does not have a death notice indicates that he didn't have anything when he died. And from his petition, we can see that his wife sold everything already because they were suffering. She was relying on charity, despite all his attempts to support himself and his family through looking after the streets, wanting to supply the jail, and so on. Unfortunately, there's just no evidence apart from this oral history that before 1867, when the Yusufia Masjid was established, Imam Badrodien was the Imam of the Lange in Sandy Lane. A Lange can be thought of like a Salahkhana or an informal prayer room, which is not an established space for a mosque at the time. And the fact that he was not, made the Imam of the Masjid when it was established in 1867 tells us that, in all possibility, Imam Badrodien died before that date. Shukran.
A huge shukran to Abdud Daiyaan. Really fantastic information and special. We know Yusufia Mosque. We've gone there many times, and many of us have, I'm sure, questioned who the first Imam was. We know about the Lange and Sandy Lane, and that there's a water pit there that was donated to the Muslims of Wynberg, and that we still need to further discover more about. And we have done some sort of research as to whether the pit can be opened. So to Abdud Daiyaan, UCT student, and of course a member of the Cape Family Research Forum, as well as researcher, publisher, shukran jazilan to you.